Imagine a tuxedo party at the North Pole. Penguins and polar bears sipping icy cocktails, swapping stories about who rocks black and white best. Adorable, right? Hollywood sure thinks so. Their animated films adore painting a chilly paradise where these frosty icons clink glasses beneath the aurora borealis. But here's the cold, hard truth. A polar Jewin summit is about as likely as Santa taking a beach vacation in Antarctica. Cartoons and common wisdom have long tricked us into believing penguins and polar bears are neighbors at opposite ends of the Earth. The reality? Penguins are devoted Southerners. These tuxedoed birds rule the Southern Hemisphere, most famously Antarctica, with a few distant cousins as far north as the Galapagos Islands. Polar bears, meanwhile, live exclusively in the Northern Hemisphere, reigning supreme above the Arctic Circle. Thousands of miles, and an entire planet, separate these chilly celebs. So unless a polar bear's been swapping postcards with a jet-setting seagull, no wild penguin has ever laid eyes on one. Despite what Hollywood scripts, these two have never starred together outside of children's books. If they did meet face-to-face, the bear would probably ask for an autograph, and maybe a snack. Hollywood's chilly fantasy of penguin-polar bear cohabitation? That's just Cold War-era fan fiction. So if you ever spot these monochrome icons side by side, check for security cameras. You're either at a zoo or you've wandered into the wrong cartoon. While penguins inhabit the southern pole, the polar environment overall is characterized by vast expanses of snow and ice. If you think the polar regions are just blank white canvases, you might be confusing them with an overexposed selfie. The common myth paints the Arctic and Antarctic as endless wastelands where only bored snowflakes and lonely icicles hang out. But hold on, these frosty frontiers have more personality than a snowman doing stand-up. Let's chill and fact-check. These icy realms boast jaw-dropping landscapes, jagged mountains, windy deserts, and summer pockets of open water where seals flop around and scientists gingerly dip toes. Well, maybe just thermometers. And wildlife? Please. Try telling a polar bear frolicking among Arctic poppies that he lives in a lifeless wasteland. Or explain to a penguin mob honking angrily at tourists that their home is boring. Yep, even penguins complain about the tourist crowds these days. Think colors scarce? Think again. Seasonal wildflowers paint the tundra. Algae turn snow neon pink and green, and night skies burst with auroras that outbling Vegas. Here's a frosty fun fact. Antarctica hides over 400 lakes beneath its ice. Secret party under the ice kind, where microbes probably throw legendary all-nighter raves. Humans aren't left out. They add flair with brightly colored research stations, popping oranges, blues, and neons across the white landscape like international sprinkles. Plus, diplomacy thrives here. The Antarctic Treaty is the coolest club you've never joined, where countries swap science instead of gossip. So next time you picture the poles, toss out the monochrome myth. Think breathtaking, bustling, bizarre. Just don't forget your scarf and camera. Despite the overwhelming cold and icy conditions, early explorers braved these harsh environments, often facing freezing and frostbite. Imagine setting off on an adventure so cold your mustache freezes into a deadly icicle. Suddenly your facial hair doubles as an ice-cold weapon of self-sabotage. Legend has it those mustachioed, parka-swaddled explorers scoffed at Mother Nature, armed with endless grit, gear, and a complete disregard for winter's petty annoyances. Frostbite. Just a minor glitch, like returning a library book a day late. Cue the reality check! Those heroic tales conveniently skipped the part where 19th and early 20th century polar gear was about as useful as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. Imagine wool scarves, boots held together by sheer optimism, and jacket layers thick enough to stifle your spirit, but never the cold. Wool socks? Great. Until your toes politely RSVP absent. Out there, where temperatures plummet to minus 50 degrees Celsius, not counting the nose-numbing wind chill, frostbite wasn't a fluke. It was the official badge of honor for any diary-jotting, selfie-snapping Arctic pioneer. The expedition's greatest hits often included a roll call of missing body parts. If you returned with all your fingers and nose intact, were you even really an explorer? Why? Because real insulation and high-tech fabrics were decades away. Instead, it was just layers, prayers, and maybe a flask of whiskey. terrible for frostbite, but brilliant for making you care less about losing a finger. Survivors earned fame not only for discoveries, but for how many body parts they managed to keep. And hey, with frostbite, forget salon appointments. Nature's free manicure takes care of all the trimming. These challenges fueled myths about secret civilizations or hidden openings existing within the polar regions. The poles, icy, mysterious, and apparently the ultimate cold, open for conspiracy theorists with a flair for frosty drama. Forget beaches and cocktails. Instead of chasing waves, crack open a parka and your wildest imagination if you're hunting ancient mysteries. Here's the chew toy of legend. Beneath the polar ice, so the rumors claim, lie secret cities of ancient super beings, or maybe massive trapdoors to hollow Earth, where historical figures sip cocoa with aliens. Tales abound of Nazi bases buried under Antarctic glaciers, probably building high-speed snowmen, and UFO runways at the North Pole. Because obviously, if you're extraterrestrial royalty, you want to land somewhere with killer views and a delightful negative 60-degree breeze. Why do these stories stick? Well, the poles come with more keep out signs than a billionaire's panic room. When a place is this remote and less welcoming than a porcupine at a hug convention, people figure, if nobody's around to see it, anything could be there. Lost civilizations, secret portals, or even a Starbucks with zero line. But what really happened when the bravest souls tackled the ends of the earth? Scott? Amundsen? Byrd? They crossed brutal ice fields, survived on seal blubber, and, importantly, didn't send postcards about Atlantean neighbors inviting them for marshmallow-topped cocoa. When science joined the expedition with satellite eyes and ice-penetrating radar, the verdict was clear. A lot of ice, some rock, and yes, more ice. If a hidden civilization exists, they've truly perfected the stay frosty lifestyle and invisibility. Still, the myth clings on, fueled by adventure novels and those famously odd flight routes that dodge flying directly over the poles. Good luck using Wi-Fi up there. So unless penguins have been secretly streaming Netflix, the only thing lurking beneath that ice is, surprise, more ice. The only portals you'll find at the poles? Airport security checkpoints. And even those aren't nearly as mysterious. Contrary to tales of mysterious polar realms, some believe crossing Antarctica should be a straightforward endeavor for the hardy. If you think trekking Antarctica is just a frosty afternoon jaunt, think again. Pack 16 pairs of socks and then some. There's a myth, mainly spread by folks whose wildest winter thrill is slipping on their own driveway, that crossing Antarctica is all about grit and a puffy jacket. According to this logic, if you own a down coat and a can-do attitude, polar glory should be yours for the taking. If that were true, penguins would be sporting Fitbits and marathon medals by now. Let's get sub-zero serious. Your neighbor's winter walks, dodging icy steps to grab the mail, don't exactly prep you for Antarctica. We're talking minus 50 degrees Celsius temps, winds strong enough to blow your eyebrows all the way to South America, and thousands of miles of uninterrupted, soul-crushing ice. Explorers lug sledges heavier than small cars, basically moving their entire apartments each day, except the landlord is hypothermia. They burn so many calories just staying upright that their bodies would send a cease and desist if not for industrial-sized bags of powdered butter keeping them going. Character building sounds poetic, sure, but frostbite, crevasse falls, and snow blindness aren't badges of honor. They're survival nightmares. Navigating isn't child's play either. Compasses near the poles spin like disco balls, and GPS units get so confused they probably call home for backup. And don't imagine these brave souls soldiering on alone, armed only with grit and gumption. Modern expeditions require Herculean logistical support. Airdrops, bleeding edge tech, and contingency plans sturdier than the explorer's own calf muscles. Early legends like Scott and Shackleton faced all this in itchy wool socks, fueled by canned beans, and sporting mustaches so questionable they probably should have been quarantined. In Antarctica, your daily reward after epic exertions is, drum roll, a sleeping bag only slightly less frozen than the night before. Definitely not your average winter getaway. However, the reality is harsher, with the poles themselves remaining unreachable until the 20th century. Before the 20th century, the North and South Poles might as well have been on Mars, minus little green men, and with even less Wi-Fi. Imagine a time when treacherous ice fields were the last unexplored wilderness, and your expedition pack weighed equally on dried meat, misplaced optimism, and sheer stubborn will. Forget searching for Santa or lost Vikings. Early explorers mostly uncovered new ways to get frostbite. For centuries, brave souls hatched heroic, and often hilariously misguided, plans to conquer the poles. These grand ideas usually involved dog sleds, barrels of blubber, and more canned beef than anyone admits to eating sober. Most expeditions didn't end with victory, but in a chilly guessing game. Getting lost, turning back, or vanishing altogether, probably devoured by boredom, if not by polar bears. Some optimists genuinely believed the North Pole was a paradise, or at least a secret gateway to Earth's core. Spoiler, it's just more ice, unless your utopia includes a high risk of snowblindness. The only thing frostier than the poles was the welcome explorers received upon returning home empty-handed, and a few toes lighter. Thankfully, technology eventually clocked in. With sturdier ships, cozier parkas, and the invention of cocoa mix, the poles shifted from deadly endurance tests into very bad vacation destinations. In the early 1900s, Roald Amundsen triumphantly stomped into the South Pole, while Robert Peary strutted around the North, certain the penguins wouldn't mind sharing their turf. Suddenly, the then mythical ends of the Earth sparked decades of extreme tourism, inspired new winter fashion lines, and produced photos that made your nose ache just by looking. No longer untouchable legends, the poles became really remote places with worse room service than you'd ever imagine. One reason for this difficulty is that compasses notoriously spin without guidance near the poles. Imagine trying to find north, where north basically means literally everywhere. Welcome to the delightful confusion of navigating at Earth's poles. Popular wisdom says compasses there spin like dizzy game show contestants, forever lost and probably accompanied by a posse of sympathetic penguins. Cute, but not quite how it plays out. Here's the real deal. Compasses don't break into spontaneous dance routines at the poles. No, what happens is sneakier and nerdier. As you inch closer to the pole, your trusty magnetic compass gets more unreliable than a weather forecast. Why? Because magnetic north isn't the same as true north, kind of like the difference between your dating profile and your morning self. Right at the poles, the horizontal slice of Earth's magnetic field, the bit your compass actually reads, drops to zero. At that point, your compass needle either swings wildly like it's had one too many, or just flops over for a well-earned tundra nap. It's navigation by cat. Sometimes it points somewhere. Sometimes it stares defiantly at the wall and pretends it's ignoring you. So how do polar explorers avoid mistaking Santa's back porch for a shortcut home? They turn to GPS, the sun and stars for clues, and an ample supply of cheerfully desperate optimism. As fun as a spinning compass would be, imagine all those lost presents and a Christmas of unmatched socks, true polar travel sticks to technology, brains, and maybe a glacier with Wi-Fi. Final tip: if you ever decide on extreme northing, know your tools. Because at the poles, anywhere but colder might just be your next best direction. Despite these navigational challenges, the polar regions have remained largely unchanged throughout time. Hook. Picture the polar regions as icy time capsules, frozen in place, untouched, eternal, except for the occasional melt. It's easy to imagine an endless white backdrop where nothing happens, aside from a penguin photobombing your BBC live feed. But believing the poles are timeless is like thinking your fridge is a pristine wilderness, ignoring that leftover lasagna reshuffling every week. Meaith. Lots of people treat the Arctic and Antarctic like screensavers set to forever wild, pure, pristine, and untouchable. In that frosty daydream, polar bears high-five penguins, ignoring the tiny detail that they live poles apart, and ice never loses its chill. Facts. Reality check. The poles are about as timeless as last year's smartphone, ever-changing and sometimes shockingly fast. For millennia, these frozen realms have danced to the tune of wandering glaciers, climate mood swings, and the occasional volcanic tantrum. Lately, humans hit the turbo button. Fossil fuels crank the heat, pollution snowballs, and tourists swarm in parkas built for marshmallow men. Punch. Today, Arctic sea ice vanishes faster than your July popsicle. No permanence here. Meanwhile, Antarctica's ice shelves dump icebergs bigger than entire cities. Think Manhattan, but colder and with fewer pizza joints. Penguins and polar bears aren't hanging around for vintage snapshots. They're hustling to adapt or move out. No lifetime lease guaranteed. Bridge. Still doubtful? Scientists in their puffy parkas and satellites orbiting overhead track every flake of change. The data is crystal clear. The poles aren't static monuments. They're constantly updating, and not with boring patch notes. So next time someone waxes poetic about icy eternity, remind them even the planet's chilliest corners can't resist a good makeover.